Hi, I'm Larry Mike Renda, and welcome back to this edition of Excelsior Forum and Profiles. With us again, part two with Lou Civello, president of Suffolk County PBA. Lou, glad that you can come back and we could talk more about some of the things that are going on with the PBA and the police department. One of them has to be like the media recently, even since our last program, really beating the hell out of the cops. And,
Right.
Newsday, we expect a little bit more unbiased, but this whole genre of defund the police and the police are the enemy type of thing, it's horrible.
Right.
What do you got to say about that?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me on for another episode here. Greatly appreciate that. And I think you're right, Larry. I don't think we get fair treatment by the media. And it's not just Newsday. I think it's just the media in general. They're out to sell papers. They're out to get clicks and likes. So they tend to sensationalize things. And all the good work we do, instead of focusing on that, they tend to focus on what negative they can find. And then they spin the negative to sort of make it like they uncovered a scandal when it's anything but. So the most recent issue was that of Newsday did a story on police misconduct, or what they term misconduct. In those cases, they made it sound like you do something wrong as a police officer and the county rewards you, which is absurd and not true. What I will tell you is that 26 years in policing, many years as a union official as well, I've never seen the policy manual that covers everything that you're going to encounter as a police officer, right? I mean, you can be the best trained, you can have the most extensive policy manual. You're never going to have some written document that tells you what to do in every single situation. No two situations are exactly alike as a police officer. So there are going to be times when you get things wrong as a police officer, right? And in those times, yes, the department has to retrain. Yes, in some cases, discipline is appropriate. But it seems like what the media wants is to be able, for the most minor thing, be able to fire a police officer, to strip that pension away, that pension that you risk your life for 25, 30 years. That would be disastrous, right? It would be disastrous for police officers. It would be disastrous for the public, because you would be so afraid to take any action, like I'm going to injure my family, I'm going to lose my retirement in every single case.
And the criminal wins.
And the criminal wins, right? That's exactly correct. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have accountability. That's not to say that we shouldn't have transparency. What we're asking for is a fair shake. Now, I believe what we have here in Suffolk County is a fair system. So ultimately, if the department finds that you committed some infraction, that you didn't follow the policies that they laid out, they can charge you with discipline. Now, that discipline results in all sorts of things. Sometimes it's training. Sometimes it can be a penalty of your vacation time. So you will forfeit your vacation time, which equates to not only lost time with your family, but the loss of thousands of dollars, right? That's a heavy penalty. And then sometimes, if something is truly egregious, you will go to arbitration, and there's a neutral arbitrator that will fire the police officer. And that does happen, unfortunately, and in some cases, it's warranted. Again, you do get bad apples, and if you have a bad apple or someone that did something that truly tarnished the badge, then certainly they deserve to be fired. However, you also deserve due process. You also deserve a fair shake. There's no reason that it shouldn't be a neutral party, right? Looking at some of these things. Again, this is not a regular job. This is a job where you make split-second decisions, right? Where you have life and death consequences, where you're asked to do so much. You're asked to, be a social worker. You're asked to be a psychologist. You're asked to put your life in danger. I truly believe that police officers deserve, right, that fair shake, that neutral party to look at things, because so much, right, of the dice are loaded when it comes to police officers. So much of the well has been poisoned. There's been so much demonization, right? We look at what we see in New York City. We see untrained civilian review boards, many of which are just anti-cop haters, right? People who hate the police, people who want to defund the police, and ultimately, they're the ones making the decisions about what police do, right? Which is insanity. It's absolute insanity. And that's why you have what you have in the city. That's why it's such a dangerous place. And the streets here in Suffolk County are safe. People move here because of the safe streets. People move here because of our police force, right? So again, Newsday put their spin on it. I expect it at this point, but it really is a fair system where you have neutral parties looking at the conduct of police officers and then making a judgment, and both sides have to abide by that judgment.
And not just that, but we've had the state come and step into the picture too with their knowledge, and they say, well, we want to look at every single incident that goes on with every single precinct and county here in New York. And even the Attorney General, who has not exactly, to my opinion, been pro-cop, cited that there was nothing wrong that the officers did in some of these cases that we saw.
Yes.
So, talk about scrutiny. I mean, you have your own, judicial county branch. There's a whole chain of command in the county, and now there's one in the state.
Right.
And if that's being followed, I can't see why they want to demonize a police officer.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the system where the state attorney general has purview over police critical incidents, right? Incidents where we have to defend ourselves, citizens, incidents where we have to defend somebody else, right? And use force or possibly use deadly force in those cases. So those used to be examined by the local DA, right? In any other walk of life, if you are a politician and you do something wrong, if you are a judge and you potentially or allegedly do something wrong, it's going to be the local DA, right, that looks at that conduct, that potentially files charges, etc. So what you have here in New York, again, is the loading of the dice, right? So you take the system that's in place for everybody else, and you say, that's not good in the case of police officers. That's not good in the case of people that make split-second decisions, right? In those cases, we want to give it to somebody else. We want to have the state attorney general. And again, the fairest thing to do, the local prosecutor, the prosecutor that's elected by the people that live here, that's who should be doing this. That's who traditionally has always done this. Unfortunately, under Cuomo, this law was passed where it's now the state AG. And to me, that is an attempt to politicize these investigations, to politicize going after police officers. I will say, as you stated, here in Suffolk County, lo and behold, it's been, we have a working relationship with the AG, and it's been going. In other places, not so much. I can tell you, my counterparts in New York City, great union leaders in New York City, the SBA, their president there, their member, unjustly prosecuted, right? In the Cooler case, that Sergeant Duran case, where you had a drug dealer that's on a motor scooter attempting to run the cops over. Right. That sergeant is in a fight for his life, essentially, looking at prison time. And again, I do believe that is because, these cases get politicized because the AG has a stake in the outcome. You can even look at it in the verbiage. So we have cases here, Larry, right, where someone is about to stab the officer. In some cases, the officer is stabbed, right? And then the AG issues a report that says there's just not enough evidence to convict the police officer. Not that the police officer is innocent, right? That's not the language they use. Right. Just not enough evidence to charge the police officer with some sort of crime. And again, these are cases where the officer was stabbed, right? Right. So to me, even the language they use when they issue these determinations, it's politicized. The whole thing is meant to be political. It's meant to make second-class citizens out of police officers, and that's dangerous. That is dangerous. Because as we spoke about the last time, you can't fill these jobs, right? People don't want the jobs anymore because, your life's in danger, which was always the case. Now your family's life's in danger, but you're also in danger of going to jail because, a prosecutor wants to make a name for themselves or because the dice are loaded. So, it's something in this state that's backwards. It's something that as the pendulum is now swinging, that defund the police movement has lost steam. I think people see it for the grift that it was and how dangerous it is to even espouse something like that. As that pendulum swings, I think we need to reverse some of these laws, some of these policies. We need to start giving our law enforcement officers that fair shake on a statewide level. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a place where you either don't have police officers or where you're getting such a low quality of candidate that it truly, truly becomes dangerous.
And let's take, for example, our fine DA, Ray Tierney, okay? DA for the longest time was referred to as the top cop. It wasn't just like Kevin Catalina, who's our commissioner, but it was also the DA was referred as top cop. And the good thing about localization, you cannot compare Suffolk County to any other county in the state. You can't compare Brookhaven Town to any other town in the state. Everybody is uniquely different in New York. Every town, county has its own flavor and its own way of doing things. And people like that. That's why they move here, like you were saying before. Now, when we have our top cop, Ray Tierney, and he's investigating something that happened, he knows the area. He knows the circumstances. He knows this area. He's lived here. He's been here a long time. You take somebody from upstate New York that doesn't know, or from New York City, they have no idea what it's like life here in Suffolk County. They compare everything to what they see in their own neighborhood, and that's wrong.
It is wrong. I mean, there's no substitute for that local experience, that local knowledge. But you're also, in Ray Tierney, talking about a guy who was a federal prosecutor, someone who has just prosecuted a prolific serial killer.
Yep.
You're talking about a national expert. Somebody like him is more than qualified to look at police conduct. And it shouldn't just be in Suffolk County. This is the same problem we're having across this state. You know, what you don't want is somebody like Alvin Bragg, right? I mean, the most political prosecutor in the state, if not the nation, running for AG. And in our state, you know, a solid blue state, he could potentially win, right? And then what you're going to have is a witch hunt. You're going to have a witch hunt for police officers over and over and over again. You can't have that. That's why the voters need to demand local control. Local control by local elected officials, local prosecutors, the people we elect, the people we hold accountable, the people that understand the values, right, that people hold here in Suffolk County. That is who you want. That's how it should work. Unfortunately, here in New York State, everything is not local control. It's hocal control, right, at this point from the governor, right? You know, it's a top-down system. You know, and some of this our current governor inherited, and I understand that. But a top-down system is inherently backwards. It's inherently un-American. We should have some say in the outcome, right? We should have some say in the way we govern ourselves here in Suffolk County. And unfortunately, you know, I think in many instances, when it comes to the justice system and when it comes to police, we don't. Right.
And that's a big problem, because a lot of times New York policy is, if it's broke, don't fix it. And that, you know, why most people would fix it, or it's different in other states. But just, you know, to see how this comes back and bites them. Years ago with Nancy Pelosi, her husband getting attacked and everything like that, and she was anti-police. Suddenly, after that attack happened with her husband, you never heard from her again about that. So by, you know, increasing the criminality of all these people by not having enough police and limiting law enforcement, okay, you have a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I agree. And you look at some of what they do. So, and I don't want to attack the governor here. She has done some very good things. She made some changes to Tier 5 and Tier 6, which is going to help us with that recruitment and retention crisis. But there have also been some really just unforced errors. I mean, if you look at the mask ban, right? They just passed the mask ban for police officers in the budget. And, you know, and I will tell you, from a philosophical point, I don't think police officers should have to wear masks, right? We should live in a place where a police officer shouldn't have to hide their identity, where they shouldn't have to worry about being doxxed, where they shouldn't have to worry about their family being killed. And I can tell you, I've experienced this myself. You know, in the past few weeks, I've had messages on social media saying that they want to cut my head off and send it to my children, right? So I understand what our police officers go through. But you pass this mask ban, and I'm trying to put it into perspective. So right now in New York State, under this ban, if I work at a Walmart, right, and I want to wear a mask, no law against it. You can wear your mask as an employee of Walmart. If I want to steal from the Walmart, right, and I want to wear a mask to conceal my identity as I steal from the Walmart, there's no law against wearing that mask, right, to help me in my crime. But if I'm the police officer that's going to try to arrest the person, right, who's stealing from the Walmart, and I wear a mask, well, I just, as a police officer, committed a misdemeanor here in New York State. Now, you don't get any more asinine and anti-police than that. So, you know, we're still focused to an extent, on this anti-police legislation. It just won't stop, and no one can look at that and go, "Hey, this is a good idea," right? No, if you're going to pass a mask ban, great, pass it for everybody, right? Again, don't make second-class citizens of us, but instead, you pass it for police officers, and the people stealing, the criminals, you have no problem with them wearing a mask. You know, again, it's asinine, it's anti-police, and it's obviously political, right? It's obviously meant to score political points with a certain part of the voter base, and again, it's just not good government.
No, it's not. And you know, what's going to be next? That if an officer wants to go out trick-or-treating with his kids, he can't. They'll arrest him for wearing a Halloween mask.
Yeah, well,
it's the asinine policies that are created, you know, and again, the needs of the many and the needs of the few. You're targeting maybe 3 to 4% of the voters, while 95 to 97% of the voters want law enforcement. And they spoke out loud at the last election stating that.
yeah.
And I think, you know, that's going to happen again this year. Now, the city, I know many businesses, they've up and moved out already. They're gone.
Right.
The crime, the high taxes, the socialism, everything like that, they're done. And they're coming here to Nassau and Suffolk County because they know they will get a fair shake, and it's a totally different environment than what they have. And, you know, the other thing is, when you're making a 911 call in the city, how long do you have to wait for that response time compared to out here in Suffolk County?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Our response times are excellent here in Suffolk County, especially considering how geographically spread out that we are. We do a tremendous job with that, making sure that those police services come in those critical moments, those matters when seconds mean life and death, right? We are making sure that we are delivering that service and making sure that our officers are there to save life, right, and to protect people and protect property. You know, I will say, if you look at this last election cycle, it was sort of startling, right?
Right.
I mean, we had socialists really win the day for the most part, which is a detriment, I think, to everyone here in New York State and to our country. These are very radical people who are espousing some very radical things, like defunding the police, right? Like, you know, like an end to private property. It's sad. It's the messaging of free stuff, even though those, for the most part, are lies and fairy tales. But that messaging seems to win the day with the young people who feel boxed out by the system. They feel disenfranchised. So I get it. We need to make opportunities for those people. We need to let them know that, you know, this is the greatest country in the world, and that you are going to be able to succeed and have that family and that house here in Long Island. That needs to be presented, and it's something that you know, our elected officials need to work on, because if not, we're going to look like a third world country if we allow this to continue in the way that it is going.
And the policy of buy now, pay forever, it's not floating with anybody.
Right.
But the thing is, you have a lot of these kids, all right, are being told by their schools that you are entitled to this.
Right.
You can get this. You don't have to work hard. You're entitled to this. And it's not true.
Yeah, and I'll say this for all the kids listening out there. You are owed nothing in this life, right? You have to work for what you get, just like the generations before you did. That doesn't mean that the opportunity shouldn't be there. That doesn't mean that the system should be rigged against you, right? And in some cases, the system is rigged against them, and I get it. And I think that's why President Trump had that same messaging, right? The system is rigged. And I think that's what both sides of the aisle needs to focus on making sure that the system isn't rigged against our new generations. That's the whole reason we fought so hard for Tier 5 and Tier 6, right? You know, essentially, you were giving them less than every generation before. You were rigging the system.
It was a glorified 401k. That's all it was.
Right, exactly. You're making these draconian cuts to that promise of a retirement. Risk your life and you're going to get a decent retirement. Same thing for our education professionals. Listen, public service, it's a noble and honorable profession.
Right.
But it also needs to be one where you can feed your family and that you're going to have that guarantee. Just like Social Security, right? We shouldn't be rating Social Security here.
Right.
We have people that work their whole lives, and then they go to retire, and we're going to cut that. That's disgraceful.
Right.
Should not be the case. I can tell you this last election cycle, we got very involved in a coalition, New York State coalition, led by the New York City Detectives Endowment Association. We had over 80 police and public safety unions that joined together, and we had some tremendous results. So there were 2 races that we were focused on. They were both primaries, right? Both Democratic primaries, and I can tell you the moderate Democrats, pretty much took a beating in this election cycle. But in the 2 races where we got involved, where we have a great state comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, who actually really does not make the office political. He's in control of billions of dollars of public employee money, right? That money for the retirees.
And the pension fund.
Pension funds,
all
right.
The other ones.
Right, and you had some radicals that said, hey, wait a minute, we can get our hands on this money. If we can get rid of, Tom's an impediment, Tom DiNapoli. If we can get rid of him, we can use this money for whatever we want. We can use it for our political purposes.
Right. And Tom said, hands off, you're not touching it.
You're not touching it. And I don't care whatever the political flavor is this week. It doesn't matter if it's green energy or if it's whatever's going on overseas with Israel and Iran. Doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that these people worked hard and that they're going to be able to retire, right? We're going to be able to fulfill that promise to them.
Right.
Tom would have lost if, collectively, public safety, labor, didn't get involved. We got involved. We did door knocking. We did phone bank across the state. I'm talking, Larry. I mean, up in Syracuse, great union president up there, Joe Moran. They're making phone calls for Tom DiNapoli. Nassau County got involved. We had a super PAC. We started a frontline super PAC that operates independently, but that is looking for these races where it's important to public workers, for public safety, and that they're involved as well. Right. The second race we got involved in was Jessica Spatton, Scarcella Spatton. She's a senator out of Staten Island. She stood shoulder to shoulder with us on this HALO bill. So HALO, anti-doxing, like I said, right now, I'm receiving death threats. You have my police officers. We just had an instance where somebody who the police officer arrested looked up one of my members and got in contact with the member's wife and tried to intimidate the member's wife and let the member's wife know, hey, I know where your house is. I know what park you bring your kids to, right? That's what we're dealing with here in New York. Also happening across the country, right, where police officers are being targeted in their own homes. Up in Buffalo, member just went to a July 4th, unruly crowd. Somebody recognizes him, is able to find out where he lives. There's shots fired at his house, that same night. So this is happening across the state and across the country. Now, Senator Spatton, to her credit, stood with us shoulder to shoulder. She's authoring a bill that would prevent the doxing of police officers, that would make it a crime. A HALO bill that would tell some of these social media frauditors that they got to back up. Like, if you're in my face and I'm trying to do my job, you can't just try to antagonize and bait. That we tell you, you got to back up a few feet, you got to back up a few feet. And if you don't, it becomes a crime. It's a rational law. It's a law. It's a law that makes sense. And it's a law that still allows you to hold police officers accountable. Well, again, in this case, you had some people that didn't like that, doesn't like that she's standing with public safety, doesn't like that she's standing with police, and they ran a primary on her. And again, they were going to take her out. Let's put an anti-police, defund the police person. And the guy running against her was exactly that, espoused all these wild things, was against the HALO law. Again, we got involved in that race. We were making phone calls right here from Suffolk County out to Staten Island, educating the voters. New York City DEA making thousands of phone calls as well, phone banks getting involved. And Senator Scarcella Spatton was successful in her primary bid. That was not the case everywhere else, right? Everywhere else, socialist on top. So it shows the importance of voter engagement, shows the importance of our public safety unions and our police unions, right? We're not only about advocating for the police officers. Without us, your police are already defunded in this country. If you don't have that pushback, if you don't have that safety rail, if you don't have that police law enforcement union movement, we were the only line in the sand against that abolish the police movement. And without us, you would have had chaos.
And it's so funny because, for some reason, why is it that these groups, you're all pro-union, except when it comes to police? Talk about bias and prejudice. It's extreme and it's horrible. It's a horrible thing to see. I mean, like you were saying about the kids today, you don't realize, like, it's $1 million to buy a house. It's $890, $90,000 to get a house. Well, back in our day, right, minimum wage was what? You were making $10, $12 an hour, right? And your house was $136. That looked like an impossible thing. Right. But you worked through it, and after 20, 30 years, you owned the house. Yeah. And it's just, now the minimum wage is much higher, okay, and they have these guaranteed raises of the minimum wage. Okay, yes, so the housing is more, this is more, everything's more. So the more you make, the more everything else is going to be. It's a catch-22.
It is. I think overall affordability is an issue, and we should be working to making things more affordable for our future generations. Right. Certainly it is relative, right? Inflation is relative. The money, as we know from the economic system, the money gets debased, right? It gets inflated. The capital you leave in the bank loses its value if you're not out there and active. But it's part of the reason that we should be educating kids financially in schools, right? They should be learning how to balance a checkbook. They should be learning what to do with credit cards and not to abuse credit cards. Those things are important lessons that I think are left out in today's education system. It's something that we should focus on. And at the same time, we should be doing what Ed Romaine is doing here in Suffolk County, right? Attracting businesses, creating jobs, creating that opportunity for people, and public service, keeping these public service, public sector jobs, good jobs that people want, because we depend on this public service. Right? Suffolk County doesn't run without public service, doesn't run without its police, without its education professionals, without those AME union workers who are making the county, you know, work and function. So it's important to keep these jobs as well as we stimulate development, as we bring in those companies, as we, you know, keep this a great place to live and a great place to work. You know, unfortunately, New York State is in many ways not a great place to live. You know, sometimes I wish we could just break off Long Island and we could float away to our own state. I think we'd be much better off. Right? You know, I think we got much, and I'm talking both sides of the aisle here. I think we have much better government officials on both sides of the aisle, level-headed, willing to work with each other. You know, you look to the city council and the lunatic fringe. Not the case. You know, you have just really fringe things like that diaphragm law that they passed that essentially criminalizes being a police officer. You're basically, anytime you put your hands on someone, you have now committed a criminal infraction. Again, insane. You don't have that here in Suffolk County. People.
How do you put cuffs on somebody from a distance?
You roll around with somebody, right? You end up on top, right? Someone's trying to fight you, kill you, and you end up on top. Well, now you've just committed a crime as a police officer. It's nuts, and it's a sad reflection on how they've brainwashed the electorate in New York City to think that police are the bad guy. Right, and they've worked very hard to do that. You know, they've worked through their social media. They've worked through the education system for that anti-police bias in schools. They've twisted facts. In some cases, they outright lie. You know, it's something that we, as people who live here, grew up here, love New York, it's something that we need to work very hard to undo.
And these kids really should be taught skill sets in school. They've just gotten rid of that. There's such a demand for plumbers, electricians, air conditioning people, law enforcement, all these things. And
shout out to the trades. I tell you, labor movement.
What are you learning in school? Philosophy? I mean, you know what I mean? But who, you know, the school districts say we are doing what the state is telling us to teach the kids. Okay? So there's got to be a curriculum change. We're out of time, but I did want to thank you again.
My pleasure.
For coming in for part 2 and letting us and the whole public know what's really going on behind the scenes. Until next time, I'm Larry Mike Render. We'll see you back here on Excelsior Forum and Profiles. Take care. Have a safe summer.